Through Mr. Mayor, it is 5:30 p.m. and the live stream has commenced. You may begin your meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Deputy Clerk. I see that we have quorum. Good afternoon, Council and members of SLT. We now call this meeting into session. And as is always the case, before we go any further, we will have a councillor read the land recognition statement. And today it will be Councillor Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We begin this meeting by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people.
Thank you, Councillor. And we now turn to the Deputy Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have some opening remarks. I will ask Ms. Wilford to please share her screen. Public meeting under the Planning Act, Tuesday, October 11th, 2022. All Town of Pelham public meetings have been canceled. Instead, the town is holding all meetings electronically via Zoom. Please note that no decisions have been made prior to this public meeting. The Planning Department will be providing a presentation regarding the subject application. Participants are reminded, please ensure your background is free from offensive or vulgar material. If inappropriate material is visible, you will be removed from the meeting. Vulgar or offensive language will not be tolerated. If inappropriate language is used, you will be removed from the meeting. Participants will remain in the waiting room until they are called to speak. Once your comments have been heard by council, your microphone will be muted and staff will turn off your camera. The Zoom chat is not monitored nor recommended to contact the Clerk's Department during this meeting. Please contact us via email at clerks@pelham.ca. This email address is monitored during the meeting. Decorum. The public meeting under the Planning Act is a formal public hearing requiring decorum. This means that all comments are to be made through the chair. If you have pre-registered to speak, you'll be given an opportunity to address council at the public portion of the meeting. If you are live streaming and wish to submit a comment live, please email clerks@pelham.ca. Please note that comments must be received during the public portion of the meeting, otherwise they will not be considered. Disrespectful comments will also not be tolerated. Please note that if decorum is lost, the meeting may be recessed and persons asked to leave. Public portion of the meeting. To allow for an efficient meeting, each member of the public will be given an opportunity to speak to council during the public portion of the meeting. Please note that after all members of the public have been given the opportunity to speak, the applicant or agent will have the opportunity to address the public comments and concerns at one time. Please note that all comments stated and received electronically form part of the public record and will be considered by planning staff when preparing their recommendation report for council's consideration. If you wish to receive a copy of the Notice of Decision, please contact the planner responsible for the application in writing as soon as possible. Contact information is to follow the presentation. Contact information can also be found on the Town of Pelham's website. Through Mr. Mayor, that does bring us to item 2, being adoption of agenda. I do have an amendment put forth by Councillor Olson that the agenda be amended to add item 4.3.1. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay. Councillors, any discussion on the addition? Not seeing any. Madam Deputy Clerk?
Thank you. For the vote, I will begin with Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you. That carries. Therefore, I have a motion put forth by Councillor Olson that the agenda for the October 11th, 2022 public meeting under the Planning Act special meeting of Committee of the Whole be adopted as amended. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Thank you. Any discussion on the motion as amended? Not seeing any. Madam Deputy Clerk?
Thank you. For the vote, I'll begin with Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, and that carries. Mr. Mayor, that brings you to item 3, being disclosure of pecuniary interests.
Thank you. After viewing the agenda, does any counselor have a disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof to declare? Not seeing any. Madam Deputy Clerk?
Thank you. I have so noted. Mr. Mayor, that does bring us to item number 4, and I will now read the notice requirements into the record. Town of Pelham application for zoning bylaw amendment, 1145 Pelham Street, file number AM-06-2022. Zoning bylaw amendment to allow the property for a 5-story, 47-unit apartment dwelling. The Planning Act requires under Section 34 that council must hold at least one public meeting for informing the public in respect to the proposed amendment. This public meeting has been called to satisfy this requirement. Notice of this meeting was provided by prepaid first-class mail to all persons who are listed as owners in the last revised assessment roll within 120 meters of the subject property on September 16th, 2022. The notice provided information on the property and the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. In addition to providing information, we will also receive any comments which any member of the public may wish to offer. If you wish to receive a copy of the notice of decision, please contact the clerk in writing as soon as possible. Contact information is available on the Town of Pelham's website and will also be displayed on the last slide of the presentation to follow shortly. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Town of Pelham to the Ontario Land Tribunal, but they do not make oral submissions at the public meeting or make written submissions to the Town of Pelham before the bylaw is passed, they are not entitled to appeal the decision. In closing, we stress that at this point, no decision has been made on the proposed amendment, and therefore any comments received will be considered by council. Through you, Mr. Mayor, we do have our planner, Ms. Shannon Larocque, in the meeting with us.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Larocque, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This public meeting is for a zoning bylaw amendment application at 1145 Pelham Street. This property is located on the east side of Pelham Street, south of Bacon Lane and north of Spruceside Crescent. And the application requests a rezoning of the lands from the general commercial 89 zone to the site-specific residential multiple 2 zone. That zone would permit a 5-story apartment dwelling containing 47 units and 1 guest suite. These are the proposed building elevations. It's 4 stories of residential units that are being proposed above ground, as well as a 5th story that consists of a covered rooftop terrace and a multi-purpose space for residents. The basement contains 2 residential units, including a fitness, yoga room, and common area and storage lockers. The main floor contains 9 units and 1 guest suite, and floors 2 through 4 will contain 12 units each. This is the proposed site plan. It shows a single access south of the building with the parking proposed to the rear and side. And council may be aware that in 2016, this property was given site plan approval for a 3-story mixed-use building. This shows the approved layout from 2016, as well as the approved building elevations. And that site plan approval also was for a 3-story mixed-use building that had 8 commercial units and 20 residential units. If the zoning bylaw amendment receives approval, it will also require approval of an amendment to the existing site plan agreement. And in terms of the provincial planning framework for this application, it's located within a settlement area in the provincial policy statement and within the delineated built-up area in the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Both of these areas are where development, redevelopment, and intensification are both supported and encouraged. And the Niagara Region official plan considers this property to be within the urban area and the designated built-up area. This permits a range of land uses. It's where residential and employment intensification and redevelopment are to occur in the long term. And the minimum intensification target for the town of Pelham is 15% of the total annual development. The town's official plan designates the property as urban living area and built boundary. This permits single detached, accessory apartments, semi-detached, townhouses, multiple and apartment dwellings, different neighborhood commercial type uses. It's a whole range of different land uses. The town's official plan also contains policy that says that when council is considering a zoning bylaw amendment for an apartment, council shall be satisfied that the proposal respects the character of adjacent residential neighborhoods in terms of height, bulk, and massing, that it can be easily integrated with surrounding land uses, that it will not cause or create traffic hazards or unacceptable congestion, and that it's located on a site that has adequate land area for parking, recreational facilities, landscaping, and buffering on that site. The town zoning bylaw zones the property as general commercial 89, and the request again is for a site-specific residential multiple 2 that would permit the apartment dwelling as shown on the site plan. And the site-specific zoning requests for this property include a minimum lot area of 150 square meters per dwelling unit is what's normally required. The request is for 106.3 square meters per dwelling unit. The request would also increase the maximum density on the site from 65 units per hectare to 94 units per hectare. The maximum lot coverage would be 23.6% of the lot area, so less than what is standard required. The minimum front yard would be reduced from 8.53 meters down to 6.03 meters. The minimum rear yard would exceed what is required. The minimum interior side yard is going to be reduced to 6.2 meters from 8.53. And the landscaped area also would be reduced down to 34.4% from the normal requirement of 35%. The minimum floor areas being provided for the dwelling units does meet the standard RM2 regulation. It actually exceeds it. And the amenity space that's being provided also exceeds what is required in the standard RM2 zone. 233.68 square meters is being provided, and 155 square meters is what's required. The parking is being requested to be reduced by 2 spaces. The current zoning requirement is 1.5 spaces per unit for a total of 72, and the proposal is to provide 70. The parking area location on the lot is also being asked for relief, and so it would allow that parking area to be located 1.5 meters from the street line, where 7.5 meters is normally required. This application was circulated to commenting agencies for comments and conditions. Canada Post provided standard conditions requiring a centralized mail facility within the building, and Bridge Gas offered no objection. Town Public Works provided some technical comments that would inform a future site plan amendment application. And as council is aware, through looking at the agenda, we've received a lot of public comments on this, so I'll do my best to summarize. Those comments are available in full on the agenda. Rhonda Ireland objects to the application. She feels the front yard setback is too small, landscaped and amenity areas are insufficient, and there's too much area devoted to parking. This individual is concerned about traffic impacts, recommends the building be moved further from the street, that the number of parking spaces be reduced by making the units larger and substantiating the claim as a luxury apartment building. Lindsay Getz is concerned about the neighborhood and community fit, the density, traffic impacts, parking overflow onto neighboring streets, the loss of privacy and view for adjacent residences. Stan and Jennifer Glanville are concerned about the loss of privacy for abutting residents and the increased density. They feel that the parking is inadequate and that the location on the site is not appropriate. They're concerned about where the snow will be piled during winter and how snowmelt might affect drainage and sump pumps on adjacent properties. They object to the driveway location adjacent to the residents on the south side of the development due to the increased noise and traffic. They feel that the development will negatively impact the enjoyment of the front yard of that dwelling and not fit in with other development on Pelham Street, and consequently negatively impact property values. They would like to know who will maintain the easements on the property, and they feel that the development will contribute to existing traffic problems on Pelham Street. They would like to see the development revised. Larry and Monique Wilson are concerned that parking is inadequate and may result in overflow parking onto Fallingbrook Drive. They note that the development will affect traffic. Lynn Marks prefers parking in front of the building. She feels that a 5-story height does not fit with the neighborhood, that the building is not a luxury building, that parking is not sufficient, that privacy will be negatively affected, and that there will be noise impacts. She would prefer a 3-story building. Gail Belcher is concerned about the increased density and height and compatibility with the neighborhood and community. She's concerned about the reduced front yard setback, traffic and safety impacts, insufficient parking, noise, and light pollution. Again, she prefers a 3-story building with 36 units to reduce negative impacts. Peter Kowalski is concerned about the increased density and height and compatibility with the neighborhood and community, the reduced front yard setback, traffic and safety impacts, insufficient parking, noise, and light pollution. Lindsay H., she feels that a 5-story apartment does not suit the current neighborhood due to excessive strain on Pelham Street traffic, additional noise pollution, lack of privacy for neighboring homes, lack of parking, lack of sun for surrounding homes, impacts to enjoyment of property. She asked whether the local fire trucks were equipped to handle reaching a 5-story apartment dwelling. She supports the original concept of a commercial building and suggests a commercial and 2-story residential mixed building to benefit the neighborhood and Pelham's business economy. Bob Marks is concerned about the increased building height and compatibility with the neighborhood and community, the reduced front yard setback, the lack of luxury amenities, whether it will be ownership versus lease, privacy impacts, parking, noise, light, and traffic impacts. He recommends a 3-story luxury apartment / condominium without the rooftop terrace floor to address concerns. Frank Belcher is concerned about the increased density and height and compatibility with the neighborhood and community, the reduced front yard setback, traffic and safety impacts, insufficient parking, noise and light pollution. He also prefers a 3-story building with 36 units to reduce negative impacts. Kevin Hicks is concerned about neighborhood fit, traffic impacts, shadowing, light pollution, privacy, and lack of provision for affordable units. Stephanie Hicks, traffic and safety concerns, shadow and privacy impacts, feels that the additional stories for luxury units only increases profits and doesn't provide community benefit without affordable housing. Marco and Caitlin Vidrick are concerned about privacy, noise, increased traffic, noise, and pollution, and the lack of fit with the character of the community. Ernie Wilkie feels the height and aesthetics don't fit with the community and that the development is not in the best interest of the community. Wally Braun recommends a pitched shingled roof for neighborhood fit that the top 2 floors are luxury condominiums, that terraces have parapet walls for privacy, that the top floor has dormers, that a widow's walk be added, that rooftop mechanical equipment be relocated, that parking be located underground. He may support a mixed-use building with a reduced height, subject to limiting the types of commercial uses, making the recommended building design changes that he's listed and other changes recommended by the community. Bruce and Maureen Massey oppose the application. They're concerned about the increased density and height and compatibility with the neighborhood and community, the reduced front yard setback, traffic and safety impacts, insufficient parking, noise and light pollution. They prefer a three-story building with 36 units to reduce negative impacts. And I guess before I move on to, let's see if I can go back a slide. So we're still at public comments. There were a couple of comments that came in after this presentation was prepared. So I'll just summarize those briefly as well. I believe they are on council's agenda. Rosemarie Cooter is concerned about privacy for neighbors, the excessive density, traffic congestion and safety, parking overflow, noise and light pollution, also the view of the waste bins. She's opposed to the amendment. Shannon Moon feels the density is excessive. She does not like the front yard setback, the loss of privacy and enjoyment for neighbors, traffic, parking and safety, noise pollution. She prefers a three-story condominium. And in addition, council received a petition in opposition to the application for many of the reasons that have been stated above, and the petition requests that a three-story residential building be constructed instead with 35 units and 1 guest unit. A number of technical reports were provided with this application, including a planning justification report, a functional servicing report, a phase 1 and 2 environmental site assessment, a geotechnical report, a record of site condition was filed for this property, and a transportation impact study was also provided. And digital copies of those reports are available through the planning department, and you can contact me if you wish to see those through the contact information on the last slide. And for all public meetings, there's no decisions or recommendations about this application being made tonight. Once all of the comments have been received by staff, we will go back and consider those and find answers to things that we maybe needed to look into further, and then prepare a recommendation report for council's consideration in the future. Please ensure that if you wish to provide, or if you would like to receive updates on this application and receive notices of council's decision, please make sure that you've either provided your contact information on your written comments, or if you haven't, please contact me as soon as possible. And again, any questions or comments can be directed to me at extension 319 at the town, or by email slarock@pelham.ca.
Okay, so thank you for that presentation, Ms. LaRock. We go back to the clerk.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. We do have the agent, Mr. Craig Rowe, in the meeting with us, as well as a traffic consultant, Mr. Catton.
Okay, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you in the council chambers, yes?
Okay, perfect, great. Great, so good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is Craig Rowe. I'm a senior land use planner with Upper Canada Consultants. We're the agent for the owners on this file. With me this evening is our clients, Dulaband Family Holdings, Mr. Adam and Jason Dulaband sitting with me. We also have our architect, Mr. Michael Allen from ACK Architects, Kurt Thiessen from our office, who is our stormwater engineer on the file, and as alluded to by Madam Clerk, Scott Catton from Paradigm Transportation Solutions is also with us, but joining in from a different location. So it's our intention tonight just to provide a supplemental presentation to what Ms. LaRock provided, and provide a little bit more detail about the application, the development plan, and also what's transpired during the review process, as we have had our own public engagement session with the neighborhood as well. So in terms of the context of the site, so our subject lands, 1145 Pelham Street, are located on the east side of Pelham Street. The subject lands are about a half hectare in size, 0.5 hectares, and have approximately 80 meters of frontage along Pelham Street. And the subject lands are currently vacant and fenced off from trespass. This next image, this is looking eastward from Pelham Street. The dwellings that are in the background are those located along Tanner Drive, which have been constructed in the past 10 years or less. This next photograph is taken looking south, so this is along that fence line along Tanner Drive, facing towards south, so you can see the existing woodboard fence, the existing drainage swale on the property, and then the cut manicured grass area. And then this is another photograph. This is looking northeast from the southwest corner, which shows additionally some of those dwellings on Tanner, as well as the existing commercial plaza, which is located just north of the subject lands. So with regards to the planning framework associated with our site, as Ms. LaRocque pointed out, we're within the Fawn Hill urban area, but we are not within the East Fawn Hill secondary plan area. And the lands are designated as built-up area, which is delineated by the province and Niagara region. At the local level, the subject lands are designated as urban living area in the Town of Pelham official plan, and that's a designation that permits all forms of residential development. However, things like apartment buildings, there are subsections of policies that need to be addressed in terms of fit, compatibility, and integration. The property has frontage along Pelham Street, which is classified as an arterial roadway in the town's official plan. The arterial roadways are higher order. They're the locations in which you would want to see more dense development or development that may benefit from a transit supportive density. And I would note, as people are probably aware that have been driving through this area, there's a reconstruction ongoing by the Town of Pelham to urbanize this cross-section of road that goes across the frontage of the property. This includes bike lanes as well as sidewalks and a new pedestrian crossover just at the northern tip of our property holdings. It's also alluded to, the subject lands are zoned general commercial site-specific 89, and that permits the development of a 3-story mixed-use building with 8 commercial units at grade and 20 residential apartments above. Because those lands are site plan approved, that land use could be constructed at any time in the future. However, our clients are choosing to go in a different direction and focus on a wholly residential development for the site. So this is just further to Ms. LaRocque's slide. This is a little bit better detail. The proposed or the site plan approved plans, as you can see with this this former or the approved development plan, a centralized building with 2 roadway accesses and parking all the way along, commercial at grade, and then the upper floors will contain that residential development. So in terms of the proposed development that's being put forward, we're going with a standalone residential apartment building, which is only permitted in the R2 zone. So that is the reason for the zoning bylaw amendment that's being proceeded. The site design itself has, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback in the background. It sounds like someone may be talking.
We're not hearing any feedback on this side.
Okay, it must be our screen. My mistake. It sounds like someone's going on. Okay, no problem. So in terms of the proposed development, so our site plan has a building located up in the northwest corner of the property with parking along the back and a singular vehicular access down at the southern end of the property. The reason for this orientation of the site, which I want to provide to council, is originally our development concept included building in the center as site plan approved for that previous building. But through our review of that, it was determined that the Town of Pelham had a design for a new pedestrian crossover up at the where the existing sidewalk is going to be along the north side of our property. Upon review of that with our transportation consultant, it was confirmed that having a driveway exit in the location close to that was not deemed safe. And at the recommendation of that consultant and the recommendation of town staff, we were asked if we could reconfigure the site and move the access to the south, so which we have, and that's what our site plan is emulating. So there is a reason for that building being placed in that location, not centralized as the original development plan. So this is a view of the preliminary site plan we proposed with the building footprint designed by ACK Architects. As you can see, this would be the single vehicular access, so all of our parking at surface. There's a dedicated outdoor amenity area that's accessible from inside the building as well, and sidewalks surrounding the side that will eventually get to that new municipal sidewalk going in that will connect over to Tanner Drive, and also that pedestrian crossover that I alluded to across Pelham Street. Our garbage enclosure will be done using a Moloch system, and the truck would be here to pick them up. So these are visually appealing. solutions, not the typical kind of wood board enclosure with a dumpster inside that makes a lot of noise. These are secured from odor and vermin, so it's a preferable element to have on site. So this building is being referred to as the Thomas Building, and we do have Mr. Allen here from ACK who will be happy to answer any detailed questions you may have about the building design itself. But in total, it's a 47-unit residential apartment building. There's residential units across floors 1 through 4. There's 32 one-bedroom units and 15 two-bedroom units. Now, the 5th floor is what you're seeing on the top. It only occupies a portion of the development, and what this would consist of is the elevator, mechanical penthouse. In this area, a small enclosed room for amenity, and then an outdoor patio on the top, but more centralized to the building. Our clients have elected to move forward with a more premium form of development. So this building would have higher end finishes in it. So it's going after a condominium style of living, luxury, in keeping with some of the more premium housing that's found in the surrounding area. This is similar to, well, this is the same elevation you saw earlier, but 3D perspective. This would be looking southeast from out along Pelham Street. This is what the building would look like from down at the pedestrian point of view. This is just a typical snap of the floor plan. This is the main floor plate, so when you would enter, as you can see, we have stairway accesses on the north and south side, and then open pedestrian accesses that come in from both the east and the west, with the elevator base centrally located, and then the rooms surrounding the same, and then building upon this going up, and then this is that walkout landscape space, which is accessible from the basement level. This is a zoomed in copy of the floor plan for the rooftop terrace. As you can see, it doesn't occupy the full roof. There's those stairwells. It's kind of central and to the west side of the building, with everything encased within this portion of a structure, and then the rooftop terrace, which is out in this area as well. As you can see, it doesn't go right to the edge. And then upon the request of many of the residents who joined us on September 22nd for a neighborhood information meeting, we've put together a conceptual landscape plan. As you can see, there's ample room for both boulevard plantings, foundation plantings, and perimeter trees on this site. These are some of the elements that the residents asked us to include, primarily for the purpose of screening and getting some additional vegetation on site, as it is clear with, I believe there's only one tree remaining on the property after development. So we're happy to go through that in more detail if council has any questions later this evening. This drawing, what I've highlighted is generally the departures from the zoning bylaw that we're asking for on a site-specific basis as part of the RM2 zoning. So the ones that can't be visually represented are minimum lot area per unit, whereas 150 square meters per unit is required. We're asking for 106, which allows us to have 47 units. Our minimum front yard setback is required to be 8.53 meters. We're coming in just over 6 meters. I will point out, council recently approved your new comprehensive zoning bylaw, which sets a maximum setback in RM2 zones of 6 meters. So we feel we could slide this building slightly and get it to conform with that requirement, and a departure or quote unquote variance from the bylaw would not be required. Similarly, with our interior side yard setback, the requirement is half the height of the building, which is 8.53 meters. On this end, we are asking for 6.2 meters. The minimum setback is 6 meters under the new zoning bylaw. So we still require a bit of relief, but we are in closer conformity. The minimum landscaped area that we're providing on site, so that would be inclusive of the amenity area here, sidewalks, grass, but none of the asphalt. The requirement is 35% of the site. We're providing 34. In supplement to that, we also have outdoor amenity on the rooftop of the building. I would note for council that there is no landscape percentage requirement in RM2 zones under the town's new zoning bylaw, so we would not require relief for that either. In terms of the minimum parking requirements for the site, based on our 47 unit count, we calculated that out to be 71 spaces being required. We're providing 70, so just under the current requirement. Similarly, there has been an update to parking requirements for apartment buildings under the new zoning bylaw, which now requires a minimum of 1.25 spaces, so requiring 59 spaces, whereas the current bylaw that remains in force in effect right now would be 71. So we anticipate if that bylaw is passed, then that relief wouldn't be required. However, given that we are on an arterial road and want to avoid any pressures on adjacent neighborhoods, we felt it reasonable from a planning and development perspective to provide as much parking as possible on site so that we don't generate any off-site impacts. And then lastly, one of the general provisions prohibits parking within 7.5 meters of a street line. You can see that dashed in here from the zoning. So we're asking to bring that down to 1.5 meters, which is consistent with the proposed landscape strip in this area, which effectively allows us to have an additional 4 spaces. But as I've noted, should that not be supported, we would be able to remove those spaces and still conform with the parking requirements of the zoning bylaw. So this is just a chart capturing the same of that. We can revisit it if we have to. In terms of the studies and reports that were completed, transportation impact study was done by Paradigm Transportation Solutions. Mr. Catton's with us this evening if council has any questions. The findings of their report were that the development change going from that mixed use product to the residential apartment results in no impacts on the existing network. In fact, with the loss of the commercial element, it reduces our peak hour trips by approximately 4 to 5 trips on peak AM and PM. From a servicing perspective, and Mr. Thiessen, who's with us tonight, can speak to any detailed questions you may have. We have municipal water and sanitary sewer connections available and a stormwater outlet just to the north of the property and capacity in those systems. So the development can be supported with the existing infrastructure. With regards to site condition, these works were completed by the previous owner, given the previous commercial nature of the site and the former gas station. The site's been studied and remediated and cleaned up. It is now fit for wholly residential units should the application be approved. And some anecdotal information, we elected to move forward with the neighborhood information meeting organized by Upper Canada Consultants with the assistance of our clients and our sub-consultants. We held that September 22nd at the Meridian Community Center. We had about 25 people come out to the meeting, and our attendees include everyone that's in the room with me here today. What we did is we provided a similar PowerPoint presentation to what we're providing this evening, an open session, question and answer, and some display boards and some takeaways for the residents to take a look at so they could formulate their comments and submit them to town staff. We provide copies of all the meeting notes and the sign-in sheets over to planning staff about a day after that meeting was completed, so they have it in their public record. And we're looking forward to hearing more comments this evening in addition to what's in the agenda, so we can put together a fulsome comment response and make any adjustments to the application as required. I have a listing of many of the public comments received, and you would see this in your agenda package. I would say in the interest of time and letting people speak, I'm happy to revisit these when it's our chance to respond, if that's okay, but we do have some responses to all these questions that have been asked. And then just briefly, I'm just going to divert to Mr. Allen just for a brief synopsis of what this slide entails, and we're of course happy to come back to it, but this is a visual diagram put together as a lot of the comments we received dealt with overlook, both impacting existing residential dwellings on Tanner Drive, as well as those on Fallingbrook. So Michael, I'm not sure if there's anything you'd like to qualify with this or some quick takeaways before we talk about it in more detail.
Yeah, thanks Craig, and thank you Mr. Mayor and members of council. I'll be very brief. We wanted to include this visual angular plane illustration. I know Font Hill does not have a bylaw that defines visual angular plane. We took this from the city of St. Catharines and the town of Grimsby, as other ones have different angular planes, but we wanted you to see the fact that the building, with respect to its height, as well as the privacy impact around the building, we fall clearly within the visual angular plane, so it does not impact or impede. And yes, final detail and design of the building, privacy for consideration of the surrounding residents will be taken into consideration. As part and parcel of why when we did the 5th story, which would be the amenity space for the rooftop terrace, we kept it more central into the building so that they would not even get to the edge of the building to have any visual impact around the property. So I'll leave it at that, and then if there are other questions, we'll certainly entertain that as we move forward this evening. Thank you.
Thanks. And just to wrap up in terms of our next steps in the process, of course, reviewing all public agency and town council comments that we're going to hear tonight, making any necessary revisions as required to our application or our drawings, and then providing some detailed responses to the comments that we've received back. Then there will be ultimately the consideration of this of the zoning bylaw application by council at a future meeting. And then upon that, should the application be approved, will be subject to a site plan approval process where all the detailed elements such as servicing, grading, landscaping, urban design, all of those elements will be captured and reviewed by staff. So those are my presentation comments tonight, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and we'll yield the floor to the public and be happy to answer any questions that may arise throughout the course of the evening.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen, for a rather thorough layout of the situation. Thank you for that. I turn now to the Deputy Clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that does bring us to the public portion of the meeting, and I would ask Ms. Wilford to please bring in our first public speaker.
Am I live?
You're
Okay.
live.
Thank you. I appreciate being zoomed in. Okay, so good evening, Mayor Junkin, councillors, town staff, and fellow residents of Pelham viewing on YouTube, and the candidates running in the upcoming town election who may also be viewing. Thank you for the opportunity to address this bylaw amendment application. I'm Gail Belcher, resident of Font Hill since January 1987, so that's over 35 years. We bought a lot in Pelham on Fallingbrook Drive for the location, knowing there wouldn't be backyard neighbors looking into our future pool. We've been the original homeowners of this property. Today I sit before you. If we were meeting in person, I'd stand, as that's slightly more respectful. Unfortunately, we're doing this by video webinar. I want to directly address this critical issue. Although you see one face and hear one raspy voice, I have many concerned voters and residents standing beside me and behind me. I'll frame my comments in the following format: some information and perspective sharing from a resident taxpayer point of view, our request or ask of town staff, council, the new council, we understand no decisions being made today, and the builder developer team we just heard from, and then a short conclusion. When I say I have many faces and voices behind me and beside me, I mean, along with a small group of neighbors, we have been door to door to all the homes within the 120-meter circle, as well as some of the fringe homes close to 1145 Pelham Street. We've spoken directly to those who live in this neighborhood community to hear their thoughts and concerns. We visited all 85 homes within that 120-meter circle. Our voices carry substantial weight since we are the ones who, under regulation, must be notified of this amendment application. We need you to hear all of us, not just me, all of us, as we are clear and united with our message and have some positive thoughts to share on how to move forward collaboratively. I'm a mediator as a profession and always work to find reasonable solutions that all can live with, not necessarily super happy with, but ones where all parties can find some aspects of compromise. The letters provided in today's council meeting package clearly, repeatedly state our concerns, so I won't take precious time to list them all again. The exemptions being requested by the builder developer are excessive, intrusive, and unacceptable. When I say excessive, I mean 30% over current zoning allowance in some cases, for example, in setback and number of stories and population. They're intrusive in the impact to our private living and recreational spaces, and overall unacceptable within the particular neighborhood setting. In addition to multiple letters of concern, you should now have a pen and paper petition I sent to the town clerk earlier today that requests town council, the new council that is, to reject the bylaw amendment application. Our paper and pen petition included 85 homes within the 120-meter circle as indicated on the map provided to me by town staff. We had 12 homes where there was no one home, some due to houses already being sold, deceased individuals, or people who've moved to long-term care. So of the homes asked to sign the petition, we had 87.5 in favor of rejecting the building zoning amendment application. That's 87.5, that's significant. We had only 9 homes, who did not sign, and some of those were due to an unwillingness to sign any form of any petition in any way, or to provide personal information, or had already expressed their concerns by letters to the town. The paper and pen petition, before you have 124 signatures, and we're currently broadening our reach with more door-to-door canvassing and have an online petition in circulation. Expect to have updates as our voices increase in number and volume. During this election, we know land infill building and building development is a hot topic on the minds of voters. Neighbors of 1145 Pelham Street understand building infill is needed. We understand that housing is needed. The land's already zoned for 3-story, 20 units and 8 commercial spaces, which is far less population dense, with fewer residential unit cars, allowance for more parking spaces, and less privacy intrusive. In general, we don't like the idea of a commercial space in this location unless the type of tenant is regulated to mitigate the same concerns as the proposed 5-story 47 plus 1, so it's 48 units, 1 is a guest suite unit, for this building development. Having attended the builder developer information meeting and viewed their information package, I have 2 comments on their package. One is the transportation study, and the second is the site plan. So for the transportation study done by a group from Cambridge, while their report is referred to as from experts, I question that authority in comparison to the actual experts, those who live and work right here, not Cambridge or not anywhere else. As neighborhood residents who have lived experience, it tells us Pelham Street, aside from the current construction, is already busy and a dangerous roadway. Succinctly stated by a police officer who resides in the neighborhood, there is no darn, I'm changing that word, way that traffic and parking won't be impacted. Pelham Street is busy all day long with increased travel during peak times. Motorists of all sizes and shapes speed along the stretch beginning at the crest at the funeral home, onward down the hill to Welland Road, and vice versa. It's already difficult to make a left-hand turn from either Spruce Side roadway or Bacon. It is not specifically the volume of the queue, which might be what's studied, it's just getting on to Pelham due to the speed and number of Pelham travelers that makes it difficult and, more importantly, dangerous. Adding an excessive number of units would very much increase this traffic problem we already have. My next comment relates to the site plan. On page 4 of 11, the terrace drawing states that, and I quote, potential views to Lake Ontario and down escarpment. During the builder developer information session, we were told the unit residents won't be able to see into our backyards and private living spaces. I think that's the angled diagram they just illustrated. I know at times I'm geographically and directionally challenged, just ask my husband Frank, but I'm confident to say, if you can see the lake from this proposed building, whether you're on the 5th floor or drop down to levels 4, 3, 2, you're going to be able to see in my backyard, my pool area, my private living space, and that of others living around this building. That's intrusive, excessive, and just not acceptable. I'll now shift to the second part of my comments, which is our ask or our request to town staff, council, and builder developer team. We want to be forward thinking. Our petition is asking the builder, developer, town staff, and council to collaborate with us, the community residents, to find a reasonable and acceptable building structure that will not be population dense, noise and light pollution producing, traffic and parking problem generating, and that will respect our land and private home ownership. For this more collaborative approach, all impacted parties can work towards an acceptable solution. As one viable alternative, we would support a maximum 3-story residential building with a maximum 35 residential units plus 1 guest unit. We're not delighted with this option, and at the same time, we strongly believe it's a workable solution or a workable alternative. During the information open house, the owner, developer, builder commented this is their family legacy building. I think that was mentioned just a moment ago as well. And it is intended for the Doulaband brothers to build their personal wealth. It seems that the Pelham community and the local Fonthill residents are secondary considerations, and that's not appropriate nor acceptable. And our alternative solution or suggestion is a workable compromise. In summary, many in Pelham are concerned that should these types of excessive amendment requests be approved, it will be precedent setting, and that is a huge concern across Pelham. The amendment application is for personal and individual gain, not a benefit for the overall Pelham community, nor this particular neighborhood and its residents. In fact, it's at our expense. It's sad and disheartening to hear my neighbors tell those gathering names that they are seriously considering, and in some cases have already listed homes for sale due to their land infill concerns. In part, we all live in Pelham because of our neighborhoods and our neighbors. No doubt the new council will have to face land infill development issues and must collaborate with both builder developers and local resident taxpayers to find solutions that work for all and not at the expense of one side. In conclusion, we, the 120-meter resident taxpayers, are asking town staff, our mayor, and our council members to vote to reject the zoning bylaw amendment application request. Thank you for listening to me and those who are speaking through me, and continue to collaborate with us to reject the current amendment and find an alternative. I'd be happy to answer any questions now or after the others who are on the agenda speak from the citizens' perspective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation and appearing before council. I turn to the clerk.
Thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. That does bring us to our second public speaker, Mr. Peter Kowalski.
Okay, Mr. Kowalski, you got the floor. Peter, are you there?
I think I'm there now.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councilors, town staff, and others who've taken part in the meeting to date. And thank you for affording us as residents the opportunity to address this bylaw amendment application. My name is Peter Kowalski, and I reside at 49 Fallingbrook Drive with my wife. We purchased our home new and have lived here for 36 years, since July 1986. Many relevant points, I'm sure, will be tabled this evening by the residents, and I applaud Mrs. Belcher, who laid out a lot of the concerns that we as neighbors have collectively. We're concerned over the impact of the zoning amendment, and I'll focus on the 5 points I identified to you by way of a letter sent on September 27th. Point number 1 is the aesthetics of the neighborhood. Many of us located to the Fonthill area and to the area we now call home due to the quiet, unobstructed skyline views and the peaceful nature of the community. We've enjoyed that for many years. It's our position that allowing a construction of the structure that has been designated for the area in excess of 3 stories would severely impact that aesthetic. Point number 2, structures that suit the area. Based on the experience of building construction in East Fonthill, that development where newer, taller buildings with reduced setback are located, it allows the clustering of structures far closer together, reducing the open, airy feel of the neighborhood where we live and that we've enjoyed. Point number 3, the structure height that would be allowed by the amendment. If it's passed, this amendment would allow structures of up to 5 stories to be constructed on identified lands. This would result in a loss of privacy to many of us in the area, even to the point where individuals living in the new build on the 3rd story and above would have open sight lines into our rear yards. That would disrupt privacy and invade our personal lives. Point number 4, traffic volumes. Any increases in housing density comes with increased traffic and increased traffic volumes. Pelham Street and the adjacent neighborhoods are very popular for walkers, runners, and cyclists. Increasing traffic volumes along Pelham Street will, without a doubt, increase safety risk to the public. Point number 5, additional noise. The size of the property being proposed will also increase noise and light pollution in the immediate areas. This increase will be of obtrusive nature to the neighbors. Based on these points and those of others that I'm sure you'll hear after me and those that Gail has expressed, I strongly oppose the approval of the proposed bylaw amendment for 1145 Pelham Street. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening, and I hope you take our concerns seriously in your deliberations over the property.
Excellent. Thank you for your presentation to council tonight, Mr. Kowalski. We obviously like to hear the citizens' comments on the development. Thank you. To the clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that brings us to our next public speaker, Mr. Marks.
Mr. Marks, are you there?
Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. My name is Bob Marks. I live at 51 Fallingbrook Drive. My property backs onto Pelham Street near the 1145 Pelham Street building, or proposed building. I've been a resident of Font Hill for over 37 years. During this time, the area has grown with single and 2-story homes. Some residents have lived here all their lives. Other families have moved to Font Hill to enjoy the privacy and friendliness of the area. I want to state 3 additional areas of concern about the amendment request. That's an addition to the letter I sent in. To build a 5-story apartment building in a residential area would destroy the fabric of the area. Even though Pelham Street is classified as an arterial roadway, I do not believe that this is the time to develop this stretch of Pelham Street into a high-rise commercial residential corridor. A 5-story building will not blend with the neighboring community. All other 3-story and taller buildings in Font Hill are in areas that do not impact residential areas. The second item is traffic congestion and noise pollution will have an impact on Pelham Street. There is a traffic study submitted to the town, but I must question the validity. Section 4.2, which is on page 14 to 15 of the report, is regarding the Merritt Road extension. The last paragraph states, the extension of Merritt Road is not expected to have significant impact on the study area intersections. Nearby local traffic and site traffic attracted to Highway 406 would be expected to travel north on Pelham Street instead of south. I do not believe the accuracy of this report. The development of south of Merritt Road in both Pelham and Welland will add to the congestion and noise near 1145 Pelham Street. The Merritt Road extension will attract traffic that currently use other access routes on Highway 406 or Highway 406. Also, sadly, since the notice of the zoning bylaw amendment, at least one family in the immediate area has put their house up for sale, and many others have started the process. For the above reasons, I do not support this zoning bylaw amendment and ask the town council and town staff to reject the application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Marks, for appearing before council. I turn to the clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that brings us to our last public speaker, Mr. Braun.
Wally Braun, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I've previously sent 2 files to the clerk at both email addresses. Can we confirm that the documents are shareable? Great, thank you. So I would like to present a possible solution, and let's start with the building as proposed. In the bottom of the section, what we're looking at is essentially an institutional structure. It is not appropriate for the neighborhood setting that we are in with respect to height and bulk that were previously cited by the planner. What I'm proposing is a solution seen above, where essentially the bottom 2 floors act as a pedestal for luxury 2-story units above. So we can see that the pitched roof and the setbacks substantially reduce the impact, the visual impact, as well as the visual sight lines that the neighborhood is so concerned about. Furthermore, the use of parapets, solid parapets substituting for glass railings or otherwise transparent railings substantially reduces the privacy issues, because when people are seated, as they will be 90% of the time, they will not be able to view downwards over top of the parapets because eye level is below the code requirement of 3.5 feet for the railing height. This is repeated on the terrace, on the roof, where the roof line extends upwards again to 3.5 feet above the floor level of the terrace. What I'm proposing is to make the living spaces on the 2nd floor of those luxury units accessible is a series of, and the word fails me now, but let's go to the next page. Yeah, so we have a series of dormers here where this pitch is more than 45 degrees, but I would suggest a 45-degree pitch as reasonable. And when you have a series of dormers, as shown here, as you have in many European locations, the impact of the front facade and the rear facade of the building are substantially reduced with respect to the surrounding neighbors. So if we could go back to the top, sorry, the first page, that would be great, thank you. So the significance of this application for a zoning change is that if successful, it sets 2 important precedents. If a 5-story apartment block can be built here, others can be built anywhere within the town of Pelham. The second precedent is if a 5-story becomes the norm outside of the Fonthill Village urban core, it becomes much more likely that 10 stories will never be revoked within the town of Pelham, as all but one of the current members of council promised to do in the 2018 election campaign. Voters are entitled to know the position of candidates on this zoning application for 5 stories adjacent to residential areas. If elected, I would oppose this in all applications at such suburban locations, but would support similar zoning at a maximum of 5 stories in the Fonthill urban core where 10 stories is currently permitted. There's a residual issue with respect to underground parking. No building that paves over most of its exterior green space can reasonably be considered to be catering to a luxury market. While developers can be expected to routinely overstate the cost of underground parking to avoid what is admittedly an additional expense, in this case, the concern of the cost of parking of providing underground parking was overstated at $100,000 per parking stall. The average parking garage cost per stall is $25,000 to $50 in US denominations. The source of my information, extended discussion are available in my submission and need not be repeated here. But given that parking experiences a chronic shortage in Pelham, elected representatives simply must become comfortable specifying underground parking as a norm in all commercial and multi-residential units. So I'm working along with Gail on this. I'm largely in agreement with her points, so I didn't need to repeat much of what was said. But I trust that the foregoing is received in the spirit offered and that further discussion might lead to a resolution satisfactory to all in consideration of the adoption of the changes requested. It is my sincere hope that a successful resolution in this case might serve as a template for impact reduction of future similar development applications within residential neighborhoods throughout the Niagara region. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bruin, for appearing before council. I turn to the clerk.
Through Mr. Mayor, that does conclude our pre-registered members of the public for this application. Having said this, I will just check the clerk's at pelham.ca email address. Through Mr. Mayor, I can confirm that it is 6:35 p.m. and we've received no emails. Therefore, you may close the public portion of the meeting and move to committee input.
Okay, thank you. So we will indeed close the public portion of the meeting and we'll now go to committee. Any comments or questions from any member of council? And I see Councilor Wink.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I noticed reading through all the technical reports, the preliminary consultation meeting with staff in January 21 was a proposal to build a 4-story building. Now the plan is for a 5-story building, albeit the 5th floor is stepped back and does not include residential units. Although if I was living in the building, I would think the 5th floor amenities would be desirable. That said, how is it being proposed to mitigate noise, light transmission, and controlling use of visitor parking on such an amenity, which would likely be used later on in the day, leading into the evening, and will impact the quiet enjoyment of the residences in the area. So it's just a matter of how that can be mitigated. I'd like some comment, please, on the lighting on the property, i.e. The height of light standards. I assume downward lighting, but more importantly, light dispersion. How can we ensure that the neighboring residents on Tanner Drive will not be negatively impacted in their backyards as a result? And the last question I would have is, after snow events, will snow be removed off site to ensure 1.5 parking spaces will be maintained year round, or during the winter months are a number of parking spaces being eliminated because of snow piles? So those are my questions.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Perhaps the applicants presentation presenters, any answers to those questions, sir? I'm thinking of Scott.
Hey, Mr. Chair. I can lead off, and thank you to Councillor Wing for those questions. I'll just kind of walk through the notes we got. So initially, the pre-consultation meeting for the 4-story building, through detailed design working with their architects, that's how they've arrived at that building. But you are correct in your assertion that it's still 4 stories of residential apartments, and the 5th story is indeed structural and contains amenity. There's no living up on that floor area. With regards to potential noise and light impacts, specifically from the amenity area, those are things that we can look at through our detailed design, whether it's the use of different balconies, glass, or I would assume insulation methods that we could do in the amenity area. Because the units themselves are going to be also under condominium tenureship, we have the ability to apply a separate condominium bylaw on top of this, which could regulate things like hours of use, set out a protocol for noise complaints and things of that nature. Moving down in terms of the overall light impact on the site itself, even the site plan approved development would require typical pole lighting to light up the parking lot. Those light standards can be between anywhere from around 20 to 25 feet, depending on what you're going for. And your assertion is correct that typically what happens is you either use a cutoff shield on the back or use a directional LED. However, the submission of a detailed photometric plan, which indicates how the site will be lighted and that there is no light bleed onto adjacent properties, is a requirement of the site plan approval process. And that lighting plan will be designed by an appropriate lighting engineer who would prepare those plans as part of our submission. Lastly, with regards to snow storage, we do have an available landscape buffer throughout the site, which is typically where snow will be pushed in large snow events to keep those required parking spaces clear. In significant snowfall events, if need be, there is also the opportunity to have the maintenance contractor, whoever that may be, to load up and truck the snow off site if it is an impediment to emergency access or a significant reduction in parking spaces.
Thank you for those comments, Mr. Rowe. Councilor Wink?
Yes, so maybe I missed something, but I originally thought that these units were going to be rented units, not condominiums. So are we looking at a condominium building or are we looking at an apartment building?
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Chair, great question. This is one that we tried to specify through our previous public meeting. So the tenureship that's being proposed ultimately once the building moves forward is a condominium. So each unit would be individually owned. The difference is that the units will not be sold. Every unit will be held individually by Dulaban Family Holdings. They will sublet those units out as rental units at market value, but they will retain the ownership over each of the units. So these units will be provided as a rental apartment for folks, but the ultimate ownership would remain with Dulaban Family Holdings. They would have the majority of the votes for the condominium corporation, and they would administer the running of the building.
Councilor?
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Wink. Any other comments? I see Councilor Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the presenters. So if it's a condominium corporation, appearance and of window coverings and that type of thing, and neatness and tidiness will be taken care of, I assume, by the corporation. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. The building itself would be governed by the condominium board, who would appoint the necessary property maintenance, which includes snow removal, grass cutting, custodial services, things of that nature. Typically, a condominium is a good neighbor because it has an additional layer of control and ensures a high standard of maintenance.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, to the presenter again. So I'm assuming that each one of the parking spots would be sold as part of a condominium, or rented as a part of the condominium agreement. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the general approach to it is that typically with a condominium unit that's owned, it does have a parking spot allocated to it. Depending on the form and function of those buildings, sometimes they can make additional spaces available for sale, but a good base assumption would be that every condominium dwelling unit would be allocated one individual parking space, and then the balance of that would represent the visitor parking portion, and that's consistent with the town zoning bylaw, that 1.5 spaces per unit factor.
And finally, Mr. Mayor, through you to the presenter again, can you sort of detail what the easements are on this land? I see the sidewalk on the north side, and then I see in the north, I guess it's on northeast side, there's some kind of a cut in the curb there. It appears for probably a driveway, I guess.
Certainly.
Mr.
Through
Rowe?
you, Mr. Chair, did you have anything further, Councilor Olson?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Mayor, Yes, there's a few easements that are registered on the property. The subject lands themselves were created through a draft plan subdivision. There's telecommunications easements out along the road. There's some Bell in here, I believe. And then as we go northward, there's an easement for a storm sewer. And if you've been out to the site, you'll see the big grate out here with the storm sewer in the back corner. I believe that there might also, I think there's another, might be a sanitary sewer easement that's up there as well. So these easements run with the land, and the site design that we've done moves all development away, so in a way that they would not have a negative impact on that existing infrastructure or any of those easements. We're effectively staying out of those areas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Olson. Any other comments? And I see Councilor Kaur.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the people presenters. Greg, if you don't get approval for this site plan, do you have an option B?
Mr.
Chair. Yep, through Mr. Chair. Of course, with any good planning project, we always look to see if we can mediate and move forward with alternatives to development. And this is a step towards that, getting some additional feedback. From a pro forma standpoint, in terms of the development of the subject lands, it makes fiscal sense to have additional units given the cost of construction. We continue to feel that the development being proposed is appropriate. I wouldn't say that there is an alternative on the table, but there's certainly room for debate and discussion to see if small changes can be made that achieve the same means for our client and also balance with the needs of the neighborhood. But we would endeavor to work through that process collaboratively. But we don't have a backup design at hand. We're ultimately limited in the position of this building, as I alluded to earlier, with the inability to have secondary access. We're kind of stuck in that location, so it'll just really come down to the height and the amount of units would be the only flexible elements.
Councilor Kaur?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. So what I'm hearing is that a lot of the residents are happy with a 3-story building, and you are saying that you are either we get a 5-story or 4-story, or we are not going to build it. Am I right?
Through you, Mr. Chair. What we're looking for is to determine if we can make effective edits to our plan that allows for the development to move forward and provide the needed housing. We may seek to retain as many units as possible, or we may come to some adjustments from an architectural standpoint that may lessen some of the perceived impacts from the development. But I wouldn't say that we're being standoffish and non-negotiable in this. We're merely listening tonight and building upon that feedback and see if we can provide something that's acceptable to both the public and the town.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much for the presentation tonight. One question I have for the presenters is this a wood frame sustainable construction design project that you have in front of us tonight?
Through Mr. Chair, I'll defer that question to Mr. Allen, our architect on the project.
So thank you. Through you, Your Worship, we haven't determined the actual form of material on this. Right now, this is process being very lengthy, and every day we carry forward, the market is changing. So it's something that may be considered at the time of construction, but right now we haven't confirmed that.
Thank you very much. I like the residents' presentation where they talked about a collaborative design, as many of the residents have a very specific concern about the fact of a 5-story building coming to this community. As a councillor and a ward representative in this area, my votes on extending this type of zoning have always been to not approve. We recently had the Pancake Lane approval come through, and it was approved by council, but my vote was no. I truly believe the position that we took on the new zoning bylaw that this town council adopted just recently correctly informed all the developers and the residents the plan that we had going forward, and I was part of that approval. Therefore, based on this and the surrounding residents in the neighborhood that we have here, I definitely would not approve a 5-story or three-story building in this area. And that is my position going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other, I see Councillor Stewart.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the presenters. I also am not in favor of a building of that height in that area. But my question is regarding the parking lot. Has any consideration been given to having a permeable surface to mitigate stormwater runoff?
To the presenter.
Through Mr. Chair, we're to the councillor. We're not at that stage yet of detailed design. This would likely have just a typical storm sewer system for rainwater collection, which would just be to grade it appropriately, direct it to the storm sewer system that would be treated and then released into the network, but something that we can take a look at if it's possible to integrate into the site.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments or questions, either to the presenters or to the residents that presented also? And I'm not seeing any. I'll turn to the Deputy Clerk.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. If there's no further comments, that brings us to the presentation of resolutions. I have a motion put forth by Councillor Hildebrand that committee receive report 2022-238 for information as it pertains to file number AM-06-2022, and that committee direct planning staff to prepare the recommendation report on this topic for Council's consideration. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay. After hearing the clerk, is there any further discussion on this resolution? Not seeing
So,
any.
Mayor, I see one of the presenters has his hand up.
Oh, okay. Well, I can't see that.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, and not mean to interrupt, but just before we move into that, I was just hoping that we could have our transportation consultant, Mr. Catton, who's attending, just speak to some of the transportation questions that were raised. I think that would be in the interest of council and the public this evening to hear some of his responses, if you'll allow it.
Okay, let me just check with the clerk, Madame Deputy Clerk. Yes, okay, that is indeed proper. So he has the floor.
Okay, good evening. My name is Scott Catton. I work for Paradigm Transportation Solutions Limited, and we were retained to complete a traffic study for this proposed development. The traffic study was done following industry standard guidelines and procedures, and assessed the site driveway intersection with Pelham Street. As a result of the analyses, which included data collection to identify existing traffic volumes and forecast traffic volumes that would be using Pelham Street, the site driveway was found to operate acceptably from an intersection capacity perspective. It's not to say that there won't be any traffic impacts. There will be new cars on the roadway as a result of this development. It's estimated to generate about 20 trips during the AM peak hour, which is morning rush hour, and about 25 trips during the PM peak hour, which is the evening rush hour. And of course, during the AM rush hour, most of the trips are outbound, and it's the inverse in the PM. Based on our analyses, the average delay for drivers attempting to enter Pelham Street from the site driveway is estimated to be about 15 seconds, which is within the industry standard thresholds for acceptable levels of service. The forecast traffic volumes do not warrant the need for signalization of the driveway, traffic signal, and they also do not warrant the need for an additional turn lane into the development on South Pelham Road. The town is planning to, or I believe they have started the reconstruction of Pelham Street, which includes the urbanization of the roadway. So you'll see new curbs out there, on-street bicycle lanes, and sidewalks on both sides of the street. So there will be new active transportation facilities for local residents and any tourists who might be riding their bike in the community, and there will be sidewalks available to them. The original application included two driveway connections to Pelham Street, one at the north side of the site and the one that is proposed at the south end of the site. The driveway at the north of the site would have conflicted with the planned pedestrian crossover that's been identified to link the two sidewalks on either side of the street. So that was removed for safety and operational reasons. There's a few comments about parking. Our transportation impact study did not speak to parking, as the site is compliant from a zoning perspective, or is my understanding it will be compliant from a zoning perspective. And one way the applicant can manage parking is by managing the sale or rental of parking spaces to individuals who wish to live at the site. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer those.
Okay, thank you for that presentation, Scott. And I see Councillor Kaur.
Yes, to you, Mr. Mayor, to the person that presented. How do you do that study? Do you have someone there counting cars? Do you have someone there at 8 p.m. in the morning, or do you have someone at 4:30 in the afternoon? Like, how do you go about that? And did you consider the new apartment building on Pancake Lane when you did your study?
So data collection, when I started in the industry about 15 years ago, was done mostly by hand. So there would have been someone sitting there. In the last 5 or so years, we've started using a camera technology that counts cars through AI learning, artificial intelligence. It's a system called MyoVision. If you type that into the Google machine, you should be able to find it. And we record traffic volumes for 8 hours of the day, which is the industry standard. So it's typically sort of 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the evening. And then there's a midday peak hour that's also captured. In terms of specific development along Pancake Lane, at the time of the study, when we scoped it with town staff, there was no development applications that we should consider in developing the traffic forecast. Now, having said that, there is a generalized growth rate that is applied to the traffic volumes, which would account for any in-stream or recent developments where there is not necessarily traffic generated by that development at the time of the count that would be on the network in the future.
Councillor?
And yeah, and one further question. Where are the cars being generated? Are they coming down highway from Welland? Are they residential cars? I could see a lot of cars coming from Weber Road, going onto Highway 20, going down to 24 to catch the Queen E. Is there any study on that, where these cars are coming from?
Sure. What would be generating the cars would be the people that are living in the site or on the site, and where they're expected to go. So they're attracted to areas where there's employment, typically during the morning rush hour. As you know, most people are off to work or returning home from work. And of course, there are other errands that people run throughout the entire day. So whether they're going north or south along Pelham Street, depends upon where they're going. The way we estimated the distribution of traffic along Pelham Street was based on existing conditions, which would be representative of the surrounding, primarily residential land uses. So if the surrounding residents are going north, we expect most of those to go north as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hildebrand.
To this presenter on parking, wasn't it your firm that did the development and parking package for the Pancake Lane development, and that should have been included in your study?
It may have been a colleague of mine. When we scope the studies, we ask the local road authorities which developments to include, and if there are any to include, and none were identified by town staff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions for the presenter on the traffic study? Not seeing any. I turn to the clerk.
Oh.
What? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Councillor.
I'm sorry. Just one question came up. I apologize.
Go ahead, sir.
Yes, to Scott. When you do your studies, do you look at speed of cars? How fast cars are going?
In a transportation impact study, that's not typically something that we would review. The purpose of the transportation impact study is to identify the impacts of the development on the adjacent intersections. Speeding is, if there is a speeding issue, an existing one, I'm not sure if town staff have a program where they monitor speeds, or if they just defer to the local police services, the Niagara Regional Police, for enforcement.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions, comments on the traffic presentation? Not seeing any. I turn again to the clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if there are no further comments, that'll bring us to the presentation of resolutions. I will repeat Councillor Olson's motion for clarity, Councillor Hildebrandt's motion for clarity, that committee receive report 2022-238 for information as it pertains to file number AM-06-2022, and that committee direct planning staff to prepare the recommendation report on this topic for council's consideration. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay, thank you. One last time. Any other comments or questions on any of the presentations we had before us this evening? Not seeing any. Madam Deputy Clerk?
Thank you. For the vote, I will begin with Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, and that carries. I have a motion put forth by Councillor Kaur that committee receive the applicant's presentation for information. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay. Any further discussion on this item, Council? Not seeing any. Turn to the Deputy Clerk.
Thank you. For the vote, I will begin with Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you. That carries. Mr. Mayor, I have a motion put forth by Councillor Stewart that committee receive the written correspondence as listed on the agenda, and that committee receive the verbal presentations made by the public listed on the agenda. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Any further discussion on this motion? Not seeing any. Madam Deputy Clerk?
Thank you. For the vote, I'll begin with Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, and that carries. Mr. Mayor, that does bring us to adjournment. I have a motion put forth by Councillor Wink that this special committee of the whole public meeting under the Planning Act be adjourned. To you, Mr. Mayor, for discussion.
Okay. Any discussion on adjournment, Council? Not seeing any. Turn to the clerk.
Thank you. For the vote, I will begin with Councillor Hildebrandt.
Yes.
Councillor Kaur.
Yes.
Councillor Olson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Councillor Wink.
Yes.
Mayor Junkin.
Yes.
Thank you, and that carries. Mr. Mayor, it is 7:02 p.m. and you may gavel out your meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Council, and these presentations tonight, and to all the residents that appeared before Council tonight also. Good night, everyone. Meeting is done.